So the first song, I've called it the Song of Protection. It's taken from Milarepa's, the chapter in the Milarepa songs called The Meeting at the Silver Springs. So I'll just give you an overview of what happens, the adventure in that story. So I'll do that, and then I'll run through the presentation. At the end of that, Saddhanandi is going to give us a little overview of protection in the Dharma, taken through the Pali Canon a bit. So we'll get a little bit of input from other suttas as well. So the Milarepa story is that Milarepa's having a snooze. He's having a little sleep, and he has a dream. And he dreams that a Dakini appears and shows him a flower or a lotus or something with 8 petals. And he interprets this as the fact that he's going to have 8 heart disciples. And he sees this as a sign. And then while he's falling asleep again near a river, a young man shows up, probably a very trendy young man, about as trendy as they get in those ages, and on a beautiful horse, beautifully dressed. And the man is going to go across the river to the other side. And Milarepa says, "Could you give me a ride over the river on your horse?" And the young man looks at him and thinks, yeah, no, I don't think I could do that. It's going to be a bit too much for my horse. And then he crosses the river on his own. But when he gets across the river, Milarepa is already there. Not only is he on the other side of the river, but he is dry. So so the young man has no idea how he's got there. And he has this moment of incredible faith that Milarepa is a great teacher and a great yogi. And he asks immediately for teachings. Milarepa says, "No, I'm not going to give you any teachings." And the young man says, "What about if I offer you my horse?" And Milarepa says, "No, I have no need for a horse." And he sings him a whole song about why he has no need for a horse. And then throughout the rest of the chapter, the young man is offering him one thing after another: horse, boots, jacket, coat, weapons, house, sister. He offers him all sorts of things just to sort of woo him slightly and just say, "Look, I'll give you, please just give me the teachings. You're obviously a great yogi." And he's such a great yogi that he doesn't need anything, and he continually sings the songs of why he doesn't need those things. And right towards the end, the young man realizes he's always believed, the young man has always believed that he's this great, healthy, wealthy, confident, intelligent young man who's ripe for the Dharma. And what's getting reflected back to him is that this teacher isn't even giving him any teachings at all. So it means that he's not the person he thought he was. So in that moment of kind of despair, he begins to think maybe he should just die. Maybe he should just commit suicide. He's so despondent and so challenged by this. And he says to Milarepa, "I'm obviously not the great man I thought I was, and I'm much less worthy than I realized. My karma is much worse than I realized. I had no idea." And in that moment, Milarepa says, "No, you are going to be one of my heart sons. I had a dream about you that you were going to come, and I've met you, and we've got a very strong connection." So can you imagine what it feels like to hear that in that moment? And Milarepa teaches him. And then the young man goes off, does a few various things, I won't tell you all that, and then comes back. And from then on, he's just serving Milarepa until Milarepa dies. Actually, he just serves Milarepa. And Milarepa gives him a new name, the Cotton Clad. Let me see if I can pronounce it. Shiwa Ao, the Cotton Clad, becomes a great renunciant. From this trendy young man that arrived at the beginning, he becomes a great renunciant. He lives a very ascetic life in the mountains with Milarepa and gains enlightenment himself. So that's the story, that's the overall story. And the extract that we're looking at this morning is just quite early on. I think it's only the second thing the young man offers Milarepa, which is his boots. So we're going to be looking at that song and then looking at the commentary that Bhante gives about that song. Yeah, so the main gist of the whole song, maybe I should read it actually, that might be quite good. Let me read this to you. Listen, you faithful young man, this land of darkness and blind views is part of the three kingdoms of samsara. Full of mud is craving meadow, full of thorns is jealous swamp, savage and malignant is the furious dog of hate, dangerous and steep the hill of pride. But I have crossed the rivers four and reached the shore of the pure land. I cut my boots from the hide of the renunciation of samsara, and with the leather of awakening from transiency and delusion, I made my boots with the craftsmanship of deep faith in karma, with the dye of non-clinging to the myriad forms, and with the thread and rope of devotion, while the clasps are the teachings of the three bindings. These are my boots, the boots of a yogi. I have no desire for yours. Yeah, so the main gist of the whole song is really that Milarepa and us, we don't need so much outer protection. What we really need is we need inner resources, we need inner protection, we need positive states of mind. We need to develop wisdom into non-clinging. And protection's a very interesting, a very grounded metaphor. I mean, all of us on quite a basic level are looking for protection in some form or other. And maybe that's come out very strongly even during these COVID days, where there's more danger in some of our lives than we're used to. Yeah, so we want protection, we want control in our life. And on a deeper level, on an existential level, we sort of know that everything is much less safe than we believe. It's all much more precarious. Our health is more precarious. The society we live in is more dangerous and precarious. There are some people that live in areas of the world where the weather is very precarious and the external conditions in terms of natural phenomena is very precarious. So we need protection, we need inner protection. And Milarepa in this song is saying the landscape isn't to do with, dangerous terrain. It's to do with the kleshas. It's to do with the mental poisons that we need to protect ourselves from. And he uses these fantastic metaphors. The metaphor of the kleshas. So I'm not going to go into loads about the metaphors, apart from it's worth looking at them a little bit in your group. They're quite interesting. Metaphors are an interesting way of teaching. Sometimes the skandhas are described. Sometimes the skandhas are described in terms of metaphors. I think Analio goes into this in that book, Emptiness and Compassion. And they often point us in the direction of the real meaning of the klesha, or the real meaning of the skandhas, for instance. So let's take just one of them. Full of mud is craving meadow. So when I was studying this a couple of days ago with the women's community here, one of the people there was saying, well, craving meadow is interesting. It's like a beautiful meadow that looks very attractive. But when you get into it, it's full of mud and it's very difficult to get out. And you end up sort of clogged down in it. So craving's a bit like that. It looks very attractive from the outside, but if you get drawn into it too much, it's very difficult to leave. And also, like the land of darkness and blind views. This is interesting. I was thinking today, often we have a lot of attachment around views, and we think in that attachment to views that we can actually see something, that we have an understanding that brings light into our world, as it were. And if they're based in ignorance, then they're actually creating darkness. And we have quite a tendency to want to draw people into our own landscape, draw people into our views, draw people into our craving. So we're drawing people into a land of darkness or the craving meadow that's full of mud. So, just notice that, notice where we invest in certain kleshas and how we want to sort of bring people into that. So the next part of the song is Milarepa describing the boots that's needed to navigate that kind of landscape. And they're kind of interesting boots, aren't they? I cut my boots from the hide of the renunciation of samsara, and with the leather of awakening from transiency and illusion, I made my boots with the craftsmanship of deep faith in karma, with the dye of non-clinging to myriad forms, and with the thread and rope of devotion, while the clasps are the teachings of the three bindings. So these are the boots. So we'll look at them a little bit in detail, but I'll just say that these boots, as Bhante says later, they need to be tough, not stylish and cozy, which is quite interesting. What does it mean to have a tough Dharma life rather than stylish and cozy? I wonder if there's something about the whole sort of secular mindfulness and the whole world of, secular loving kindness, whether a Dharma life becomes stylish, if not cozy. And are we trying to do the same as that or something different? What does it mean to have a Dharma practice that is tough training? I think Bhante says something like, they're not necessarily comfortable to wear. They might hurt a bit to begin with before you wear them in, maybe, like all boots. They need a bit of wearing in. So you can maybe have a look at that. We'll have a look at that in the groups. Yes, and I think also it might be worth just looking at the difference between disgruntlement and disillusionment. So Bhante uses this phrase, are you just becoming disgruntled? Like you want a different, you want your preferences to be met. You're a bit disgruntled with instant coffee. You really want real coffee, freshly ground. Or are you disillusioned with sense pleasure? And what does that mean, to be disillusioned? Pema Chodron also goes into all of this in her commentary on the Bodhicharyavatara. She uses slightly different things. She calls it wholesome disillusionment and ordinary disillusionment. So wholesome, or more spiritually sort of disillusioned, will motivate us to change. It will motivate us to begin to practice more strongly. Whereas disgruntlement will just simply want us to instigate stronger preferences in our life, which is the very opposite. So I just want to say something about these boots. I cut my boots from the hide of the renunciation of samsara. So it's a renunciation of self-interest, and this is the protection. It's a renunciation of the self-interest. It's also a renunciation of the view that self-interest protects us and is the way to get happiness. So that's the renunciation of the view that self-interest protects us and is the way to get happiness. Just noticing when we assert our self-interest because we think that's the best thing for us. In the Bodhicharya Avatara, Shantideva says, If one does not let go of self, one cannot let go of suffering, as one who does not let go of fire cannot let go of burning. This is very subtle teachings, and I think it's very hard. It's almost like counterintuitive that this is actually true. So you could explore that for yourself. I mean, one way of looking at it is more like, how does suffering or how does dukkha show up? I don't mean first level of dukkha, because obviously that's showing up in all our lives. But the second level, the level of dukkha that actually the Dharma can eradicate, how does that show up in our lives? And in what way are we the, what's the word, beginning of it? Let me think. Cause of it. In what way do we cause the suffering that we experience? The Dharma is telling us that it can overcome suffering, but it can only overcome the suffering that we are ourselves creating through self-interest. So you need to really explore that in quite a lot of detail and ground that in your own knowledge and experience of yourself. Throughout your day, you could even ask yourself, in what way am I creating suffering right now? So we hold on to self-interest as a defense. It's our protection. The song calls it untrustworthy protection, which is a very appropriate play on our usual perspective. Usually we think of protection as being trustworthy, whatever it is, whatever false refuges we're putting in our life, we tend to think of as protection that's going to help. But it's untrustworthy protection. Then we've got the leather of awakening from transiency and delusion. So what does Bantu say when he talks about it? Yeah, so to awaken to absolute insecurity. This is how he talks about it. To awaken to absolute insecurity. So we've got to let go of the sleep of ignorance. Let go of the ignorance of impermanence. Develop the ignorance of, develop an understanding of impermanence. Wake up to the reality of this life and absolute insecurity. I think I had a glimpse of that actually quite early on when we were locked down in the UK, and suddenly the whole world was beginning to change, and you realise I realised for myself a lot of things that I'd assumed, like Adhisthana would continue to run retreats, I would continue to have contact with my family, I would continue to get the food that I wanted. There was a lot of things that I assumed was going to stay the same, and suddenly it was all very different. And there was a brief moment where I woke up to the whole impermanence and insecurity of the situation. In another seminar, Bhante talks about our desire or our attachment to sense pleasures as this. He says, it is a sort of assumption that these sensuous experiences or that experience of life will continue in the way that it has always done. It is not only reliable, but also relatively pleasant, and you can count on things continuing in that sort of way, hence an optimism. And therefore you assume a certain solidity in your experience. You take it for granted that things are going to continue in that sort of way. We have an assumption that what we are doing is going to continue. So attachment to sensuous experience in this life doesn't mean so much attachment to specific forms of pleasure. It is rather this taking for granted that things are going to continue in the way that they've always done. It is an attachment to this whole pattern of existence to which you've become accustomed, and which you go on taking for granted, and which you base yourself and your life and your expectations on, until such a time as something happens to shatter it. So just noticing where we're forming those patterns in our life and resting a sense of security and control in our life. Then another aspect of the boots. I made my boots with the craftsmanship of deep faith in karma. And Bhante says, this deep faith in karma is to accept our unskillful actions will have unforeseen consequences. It's interesting, as one of my community members pointed out, that he's decided to, he's brought out this unskillful actions having unforeseen consequences, but actually our positive actions will also have unforeseen consequences too. And but the most important thing is that there's craftsmanship in terms of engaging with the law of karma. There's craftsmanship in terms of our life and our belief in actions having consequences. It's a very profound teaching. I think most of the time we're quite ignorant of how our actions have an effect. And I like the idea that actually to really understand that takes a level of craftsmanship, or to understand it is to be a craftsman in the spiritual life. I wonder if you've ever experienced something unforeseen and then gradually tracked it back to a particular tendency or action of your own. I sometimes think actions build up in very small ways. When I meet people and they're on retreat, for instance, and they're having a big drama, and I sometimes say, where did it start? And it sometimes started in a very small action a few days before, and it had been gradually building up a head of steam, gradually building up momentum until it's a much bigger thing. But we're feeding often the tendencies in a very unaware way. So just noticing the things that are happening in our life and where they've come from. To track your experience is to bring a kind of ethical perspective in your Dharma life. It's to be a craftsman. Then these boots are stained with the non-clinging to myriad forms. And Bhante calls it non-attachment to all the many forms of this world and of our mind. So whether those forms are coming in through the senses or whether they're forms that we're creating through our thoughts, we're very attached to them, we cling to them, we cling to ideas. So to be stained with non-clinging, this is a very beautiful metaphor. When you stain something, so I'm a textile designer by trade, and or by education anyway. To stain something, you start off with a piece of cloth or a fabric that's quite white and pure, and then you stain it with a colour. And the colour goes all the way through. So if we're stained with something, it means we're coloured by that all the way through. There's that lovely moment, isn't there, after the Buddha gets enlightened, where he looks over the world and he thinks it's too difficult to teach these people. I can't pass on such a subtle teaching. And he says, people are stained in lust. In other words, when we're so full of our own colour, it's very difficult to put a new colour in. I mean, you can see the whole Dharma life as a way of becoming more and more pure, not in terms of pure as in, what would be the word, kind of holy, not in terms of holy, but in terms of being freer of the stain of our own ego and views. Not because, well, partly because it eradicates suffering, and partly because it's only by doing that you're going to receive the dye of the Dharma. And that's what we're trying to do. Receive the dye of the Dharma. Create a mind that will that absorb the Dharma well. And then these boots are all stitched together with the thread of devotion. And Bhante calls it binding us to our ideals, which is a nice metaphor again. We might have ideals, but we can't maintain our connection with them in our daily lives. We need something that helps us maintain that vision, maintain a fidelity to our ideals. What helps us to do that? And sometimes being around people that are practicing the Dharma helps us maintain our connection with our ideals. Having good friendships with people who are practicing the Dharma that helps us. It stitches us more strongly to our ideals. And then there's a whole section in the commentary, which there might be time to go into when you're doing the study. Milarepa talks about, Bhante talks about Milarepa's primary aim is to get rid of ego clinging. And then he says, this should not be confused with a kind of feeble self-effacement. All right, so he's not asking us to become sort of kind of neurotically humble. He's asking us to still take pride in ourselves. And then Bhante talks quite a bit about the difference between positive pride and kind of a negative humility. I'll just say a little bit about that in case we get into the study. Yeah, so positive pride is unconnected with ego clinging, and it starts with an honest satisfaction with what we're doing. So it might be quite good in our study if we can distinguish between the two, between a kind of neurotic sort of feeble self-effacement, like playing ourselves down, and what it means to be really free of arrogance and stand in a positive pride. In Bhante's seminar on called Know Your Mind, he talks about arrogance as being mana, translating mana. He says mana is arrogance as distinct from pride, like healthy pride. So he says healthy pride guards us from doing things which one should be ashamed of. One can have a healthy confidence that one is capable of achieving worthy aims. But arrogance is an inflated idea of oneself in comparison with others. So this positive pride is really seeing that we're capable of something great. You know, we're worthy of the spiritual life, and then we live up to that. There's that beautiful verse, isn't it, in, oh gosh, I think it's in the Bodhicharyavatara again, isn't it, where Shantideva talks about, I've at last been born into the family of the Buddhas. What does it mean to be born into the family of the Buddhas? It means you have to live up to the reputation of that family and walk tall with it. Yeah. What does it mean to walk tall and not be intoxicated? So this is just all very interesting area for us. I mean, another interesting area is having pride in one's tradition, having pride in one's teachings and in one's teacher. And Sangharakshita has been quite a controversial figure and received quite a lot of criticism, and Triratna's received criticism over the last couple of decades. So, you know, there might be a point where in our study group we might look at what does it mean to walk tall and have a kind of pride in what we've received in terms of teachings within a situation where it's sometimes being criticized or our reputation looks a bit shaky. Yeah, and in the last paragraph, Bhante talks about the young man he's not been able to transform his worldly self-respect into genuine Buddha pride. So again, exploring what does it mean to have a healthy confidence and Buddha pride, and what is the difference between the two. So so this song is all about protection, real protection, a protection from our experience of reality. And in a way, it's asking us to engage more strongly with reality rather than trying to sort of block it out, rather than trying to rely on something false and untrue, really entering what is reality, that kind of precariousness that we have to live alongside. Giving up false refuges, giving up the, engaging with renunciation. I mean, I heard a teacher once say, renunciation was giving up unrealistic expectations of samsara. So think about that. You know, what does it mean to give up unrealistic expectations of samsara? I think sometimes we think we've fallen in love with somebody. We haven't particularly fallen in love with somebody. What we've done is we've suddenly got hopeful that falling in love was possible. we've got an unrealistic expectation of samsara, that it is possible to have this really blissful, happy life, and this is a moment where that it could happen. Yeah, so it's asking us to be more protected from reality by having more realistic ideas about what that is and entering into more of the nature of it. But you need good boots in order to move across that terrain. Okay, so I'm going to ask now Saddhanandi to just join us, and he's just going to talk a little bit more about protection.
Hello everybody. So this is really just a very brief footnote on protection in the Buddhist tradition, and it comes out of having recently done retreats on the Metta Sutta and the Heart Sutra, and just being quite struck about how much traditionally there is emphasis on these suttas of sutra giving protection. So that there's often a very strong connection as well between blessings and protection in traditional Buddhism. The two often go together. There's the 3 blessing suttas in the Pali tradition, the Metta Sutta, the Ratana Sutta, and the Mangala Sutta. And they'll be recited on all sorts of occasions to give blessings and bring protection. In traditional, if you like, folk Buddhism, they're seen to have an almost magical power in blessing and protecting. Reading some of the Mahayana sutras as well, I've often been almost a bit frustrated. There's just so many verses going on about how much one benefits by hearing the sutta or reading the sutta, and how one is protected and blessed by just hearing it. And it's found myself wondering, when are they going to get round to the actual teaching? You know, it's all about how the sutra is giving blessings. And yeah, so the question is, how can the Dharma protect? And we've heard something from Milarepa and Saddhanandi just now. But just traditionally, the protection is said to come from the power of truth, the power of virtue, the power of love, and the power of sound. The power of sound can be hearing the sutta, reading the sutra or sutta, or even just the condensed Dharma in the form of a mantra. So protection coming from truth, virtue, love, and sound. This is all woven there into the Buddhist tradition. So just a footnote about protection and blessings in the tradition.
Thank you.